if Christian is even going to be joining us. I don't know. He haven't heard from him in the last hour or so. So who knows? I'm not sure if he's coming or not. But even if he doesn't come, I'm ready to rock and roll. Hopefully he does show up shortly, and then we can kick this off. But got a live one for you today. Today we're going to be talking about a monster, right? Climate change is a monster, right? It's one of the biggest bugbears that the political world has faced in quite some time. And I think the reason for it is because it holds the potential to wield political power. It holds the potential to move the masses in a direction one way or the other, and to use that political power to achieve political aims, right? Um, so let's talk about climate change in the most generic sense. In the broadest sense, it incorporates three huge categories, right? You've got the earth, you've got the sun, right? And as the sun gives off heat and radiation, that radiation makes its way over to the earth, and that's category one, solar radiation, right? So there's a lot of energy that comes from the sun and hits the earth. Category number two is the reflectivity of the earth and the earth's surface, both the earth and the earth's surface, because the earth cloud cover has some reflectivity too. This is called albedo, right? So the reflectivity level of the surface of the earth, which is like whether or not the sunlight bounces off the water of the oceans, or whether or not it bounces off the clouds and goes back out into space, or sometimes if it bounces off the polar ice caps, which has a very high albedo, it'll bounce back up into space, right? That's category number two. Category number three is the Earth's atmosphere and what it does to the energy input and output, right? Because in the broadest sense, hey Tanya, how you doing? Welcome aboard. In the broadest sense, what you've got is you've got a system where energy is going to our planet and energy is leaving our planet, right? And the amount of heat that we will feel here on the planet's surface as human beings is going to be a function of how much of the sun's energy stays here, right? So simple enough, right? This is easy enough. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about before we get into some of the science and the data of this, which it can get actually kind of like, it can get so detailed that I'd be in over my head scientifically. But before we even get into that, I want to go into some of the history of climate change, because it might help. Hey, Vicky, how you doing? Welcome aboard. It might help you guys to understand exactly where this becomes a political issue and why it's so complicated, right? So one thing to know is that it wasn't always called climate change. In the 1970s, for those of you who were around back then, it was called global cooling, because at the time, several headlines hit newspapers and scientific articles there. I think there was one in Time magazine and there was one in Newsweek saying, like, look out, there's going to be an ice age soon, right? Because the temperatures of the earth had been cooling over the previous decade or so, right? And we now know that the reason for that is probably because of like a temporary issue, especially with like aerosols that we had put into the air. But at the time, it seemed like that's where the science was pointing. It seemed like the Earth was getting colder and colder, right? Now, you fast forward that into the 80s and 90s, and then they changed global cooling to global warming, right? And so, of course, this is pretty confusing. I just heard from Christian. Christian will be here in about 10 minutes, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep plugging away. All right, so you've got a situation where global cooling turned into global warming, and now everybody's like, wait a second. Wasn't it just global cooling? Do the scientists even know what they're talking about? And, then everybody's confused, right? Because now one of the things to understand is that before, when it was global cooling, when it was in the 70s, that wasn't really the majority opinion, right? Part of the problem was part of the confusing part of that was that scientists were saying, no, it's really getting warmer over time. But there was a small group of scientists that was saying it was getting cooler, like 10% of them or something like that. And so meanwhile, you had these newspaper articles pick up this information and like throw it out, and they really didn't know how to parse it. They didn't talk to the right people, right? And so then you've got everybody is confused, right? So everybody's thinking, is it cooling? Is it warming? And so eventually it ended up just turning into climate change, because that covers all of the bases, right? It covers cooling, warming, any kind of problem you have with the globe. All right. So why is climate change a problem for anyone, right? One key thought is that as energy comes into the earth and it gets trapped here, what can happen is that energy, right? That energy has somewhere to go. It's got to have somewhere to go. It's got to do something, right? Otherwise, the energy, so it can hit us as heat, but it can also hit us in a lot of other ways, right? It can also transfer its energy into the weather and create, like, for example, storms. For those of you guys who are familiar with hurricanes and things, storms like that, they actually are more powerful the warmer the water is, the warmer the area is, the more energy they can soak up into that storm system and spit back out, right? So this is why people worry about climate change. Now, there's a lot that goes into this, and a lot of this is very politicized, right? So I want to be careful about how I say these things, because I'm going to tell you something, and I don't want you to take it the wrong way. I'm going to explain it. You don't have to worry that much, right? That's a big point that I'm trying to make. You do not have to worry that much, right? I'm going to start there, right? Because the absolute worst this can get, and I'm talking about like the worst it could possibly get, is if we burned every fossil fuel reserve in the entire Earth, and the planet is, according to the science that I've been researching for part of my life and then again refreshing myself all day, the most you're going to see is like an 8 to 10, maybe a 12-degree change in temperature, right? And don't get me wrong, because that will shake up some ecosystems. It will. It'll change situations for plant life, animal life. It'll change, the ice caps will melt, right? Things will change, right? It will affect the world. It will probably create a situation where the water levels rise around the globe, and several of the cities that we have a lot of population centers that are on the coast, right? Like, New York, DC, LA, and Atlanta, you name it, right? They're all, most of the population centers we've got are on the coast, because water is one of the key things that humans live with, right? So if that water level rises, you're going to have a lot of cities that are then underwater, or at least partially underwater, and people are going to have to migrate back into the mainland. And that's gonna upset a lot of things. Here's what it won't do, right? And this is where I want to be absolutely clear where the limits of this problem are. What it will not do is turn into some kind of runaway greenhouse effect that makes Earth into Venus. Almost certainly. I'm going to read a quote to you from it's called Goldblatt and Watson. It's a scientific journal, and there's another one in Nature, in Geoscience, that basically mirrors this, right? This is recent science, right? This is like 2011, 2012. A runaway greenhouse gas effect akin to Venus is virtually impossible. Impossible, right? So, like, we're talking about the climate scientists, right? These are the people who push the climate change agenda, are telling you that this just would not happen, right? It's just the worst it can get is just not that bad, right? And so another thing to understand is that humans, on average, thrive in warmer temperatures, right? If you go back and you look through humans haven't been around that long, but if you go back and you look at humans for the 300,000 years or so that we have existed, right? It's been mostly like, you'll see our populations rise and fall with ice ages and famines and all that kind of stuff. But you'll see our populations almost always go up when it's warmer, and they almost always go back down when it's colder, right? So the thing, yeah, everybody likes warmer temperatures. I would love to have a beachfront property, like my house in Cary, my house in Raleigh, North Carolina. I would love for them to, for the water levels to just, I'm kidding. I don't want anybody to be displaced, but it is possible that it could happen, right? If we don't address this situation. Right. But I just wanted to let you guys know that the worst possible situation that we're going to run into is actually just not that bad. Right. So then the question becomes, why does everybody think it is? Right. And that's where the politics comes in. Right. Because then you've got this game that's being played, because it's like even like I mentioned in the 70s, when the global cooling was being reported by a minority of the scientists, and most of the scientists were saying, no, it's going to get warmer and warmer. That minority was the part that was picked up by newspapers and by politicians and sped out to the people, because that's the part that, hey, thank you so much, Tanya. All right, so Tanya says water level rising isn't concerning. What about volcano eruptions, Yellowstone? What about massive earthquakes? Right, so one thing at a time. Yes, so like I said, water level is a concerning item, right? And it like I said, it will basically push all of those population centers that are on the coast in toward the mainland. Now, that is unless we do something called geoengineering, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Basically, there's two ways to go, right? We can either adjust and adapt and just move inward toward mainland to address that water level change, or we can do something called geoengineering, which is like use whatever we've got available to us to try to address the problem. Like one thing that I've seen people do is like they'll make these like giant walls, basically. So the water level comes up higher and higher and higher, but it doesn't matter because it's just running into a wall, right? And the city's over here. Right. And that's something kind of like what New Orleans did after the flood, was to like try to shunt out any kind of extra liquid from the Gulf. Right. We can do that. We can do that right now. We can create a scenario where even if the water level gets super, super high, we can just basically just wall it all off. Now, I'm not saying that that's the best case scenario. It isn't. There are other things, better things that we can do to address the problem before then. And even by the time it gets to that point, like we're talking like decades and decades into the future, right? Like maybe even a century. The timeline, one of the hardest things to learn about this is the timelines. The timelines are not very accurate, and the margin of error is so large that it's like, I could say, yeah, 50 years from now that could happen, but that's give or take like 150 years, in either direction, right? So like it could have happened. Oh, we got Christian. I think we did. Hey, he made it. He made it.
Sorry, so sorry.
That's fine. Just don't let it happen again. So all right, I'm going to catch you up on where we are so far. So we talked about climate change. I talked about the three basic categories that produce climate change between sun's radiation, the Earth's reflectivity, and the atmosphere, right? Yeah. And I discussed basically where I'm at right now is I'm telling them that the absolute worst case scenario that this could possibly get to, right, even by the scientists, right, is just like an 8 to 12 degree increase in temperature. Like what even the scientists are saying will never happen is it's never going to turn into like a situation where these runaway greenhouse gases turn us into like another Venus, right? And that's the fear in the back of people's minds. The people's minds are thinking like, oh gosh, we're all going to die. And it's like, no, at the very worst, maybe some of us will, if they refuse to move from a coastal city, over a century, right? Like,
well, yeah. Nobody wants to live in sub-Saharan Africa today. So,
right. So anyway, so just to make sure that you guys understand, that's the worst possible scenario, right? So you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid. Now, that isn't to say that we shouldn't do things to be good stewards of the climate, right? But I want to start with that because I want you guys to know what the limits are, right? The limit is the very worst that thing that can happen is we can basically get to a situation where, it's a little bit warmer, You've maybe changed some of the ecosystems around, you know, like maybe the polar ice caps have melted and stuff like that. It's going to change the world, but this kind of cycle that where the world changes like that happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so another big thing that I wanted to tell you guys about is to look at these timelines, right? When you guys go online and you study this, one of the things that you'll see is that the most of the charts are like last 1,000 years, maybe last 2,000. Sometimes
Yeah.
you find a chart that's like last
Very true.
15,000 or 20,000 or something like that. What you need to do is go look at a chart that's like the last 300 million years. And you'll see that like over the last 1,000 years, it looks bad, right? Like the last 1,000 years, all the charts are like, bloop, like right up to the top. Like we're all gonna die. Like it's this giant limit, you know, that curves up into the stratosphere, and you know, you're everybody's toast. But the truth is, if you go over like the last million years, like 10 million years, 50 million years, 100 million years, you see this like up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And we're like down and then just starting to come back up. Like just starting to come, like the heights are up here and we're like nowhere close to the warmest that the earth has been. Nowhere close. In fact, the scientists, even the climate scientists say that if we were to burn every fuel reserve on Earth, we would basically just get the temperature of the globe back up to what it was like when the dinosaurs were here. And the Earth was just fine then. Like the dinosaurs didn't die because of greenhouse gases. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong, like there's plenty of stuff that can happen, right? And you know, Tanya's talking about you know, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Yeah, you can definitely have some crazy situations like you know, super volcanoes. But a lot of what people are talking about when they're talking about climate change, they're not really talking about like tectonic activity so much, although it is a like a very, very small factor as the energy gets fed into the system. But it's like you're most of the time you're talking about yeah, Charlie says that means bigger mosquitoes. Yeah. No, not the mosquitoes. All right. So
well, let me make a few comments if I may.
Yeah,
right. So I appreciate you framing that. I think that's important because this issue is framed around fear, right? Fear being a motivator for policy. And yes, the carbon capture, carbon release has been cyclical for the last 300 million years, right?
Yep.
And so people are freaking out that we're releasing buried carbons in, i.e., fossil fuels that have been stored up. But there's still processes going on there that are storing, that are capturing carbon dioxide for long-term things. I mean, this is a normal sort of biology. And so when we take the fear out of the question, right, and you see it rationally, like it comes down to, okay, I can see this economically. People like things to be stable. They don't like change. The thought of it getting warmer is something that people, right, especially if you want to make investments, or if you're looking at the future, you want oceanfront property, you know, you want it to stay, ocean levels to stay where they're at, or things like that, or the climate to stay where they're at. So for projecting out, but again, the rate of change is very, very modest. It's certainly not hostile. And if anything, more carbon dioxide can be good for us and have more climate, there's more land available for humans to live in that right now is too cold.
Right.
Having that become a little more mild would not be a negative thing. So there's a large, you know, especially because so much of the world's populations are on coasts, because when you're by the ocean, you're a little bit more mild climate, right? You have more extremes as you go inland, and especially extreme cold. Farther you get away from the oceans, the colder it gets. So a little bit warmer could make those areas much more inhabitable, much more interesting for larger populations. Now, so yeah, some accommodation would be made, but right, it's not something that has to be made today. It's not like pack your bags and go. Right. Let's get hand carts. We don't even have time to fill our cars with gas and move, or rent a U-Haul. Like, it's not that extreme. It's something that just, right, as it makes sense, you're like, oh, hey, the winter in Minnesota isn't exactly make me want to shoot myself. Maybe I'll live here. And
Right.
people will start making those decisions, and people will live there more.
Yeah, like
And
Greenland
like
and Canada might actually be like inhabitable at this point.
Like, yeah, you can be like, yeah. So I have a good friend from Timmins, Canada, which is 5 hours, a gold mining town, 5 hours north of Toronto. If you can imagine getting to Toronto in the winter and saying, all right, we just need to head straight north 5 hours. And imagine, like, yeah. Anyway, but imagine, like, yeah, all of a sudden, like, the only people who are there are people who are making money mining gold. And then, and then they're like, I got my gold. I am off to Jamaica or wherever, Carolina. Well, he came here. That's where I met him, in North Carolina.
That's, I mean, so many people.
I think obviously the combinations are not are there. So why do the elites want us to feel extreme fear or feel that our action must require immediate stop the presses kind of action? That's the type of immediacy and things that all the data does not say is expedient.
Right. And so, yeah, it's interesting. You brought up the economics of the situation, and how in economics, right, what people want is for stability, essentially, right? Here's a element of stability that the elites really want, that they are using. This is my appraisal, right? So guys, take this with a grain of salt, but this is my my theory, right? This is the stability that the elites want, and they're using climate change to do it. What they want is, they want the people who are already industrialized and wealthy, which are where the elites come from already, the West, and basically, essentially, so that's where we are. They want us to stay there and for nobody else to overtake us, right? And so one of the problems is, if you don't have climate change, you allow a lot of third world countries the opportunity to have a come up, right? Like, basically, yeah, countries like India, China over the last,
they're terrified that they'll be industrialized fully.
Like, yeah, Pakistan and stuff like that, right? And that's why, like, a lot of these places are so warlike, right? Is because you've got a whole, like, so it looks nice from the West, right? We look around and everything is like hunky dory. We're living in these like palatial mansions, right, compared to the houses in the rest of the world. And meanwhile, you've got 6 billion people, 5 or 6 billion people that are like literally making $1 a day. Like, that's their whole, like, what, they're living in cardboard shacks, of which I could build a better structure in my own backyard with some 2x4s, right? Like, that's how bad it is. And meanwhile, we're telling them the thing that would help them more than anything else on earth, and this is proven, the thing that uplifts more people out of wealth than anything else on earth, is industrial capitalization. So if you have a capitalism system with industrialization that has done more to uplift people out of wealth than any other system on earth, and we're basically telling nations in South America, nations in Africa, no, you can't have that, because you might put some carbon.
Yeah, they're terrified, right? So India is one. I've been to Bangalore. I've been to southern India. And the cities, right, there are a lot of wealthy, educated people who come to the States. They see what their standard of living is in the States, and they want that. And they're starting to build their cities, build modern, architecture, engineering in their cities. And out in the countryside, right, now they want real roads. And rather than people like, I went out to the country outside of Bangalore, and there's still like carts dragged by oxen and things like that. They want to, no, let's have these farmers have tractors. And
cars.
People bring the stuff to market in trucks. And they're so terrified that 500 million Indians will be able to have, everybody will have a car in the driveway, a refrigerator in their home, and gas stoves, and real roads, the infrastructure for 500 million people, they're terrified of all of the industrialization that will come into it. And I don't think they should be. I think that fear mongering is it's gatekeeping, and
Absolutely.
and I don't think is going to be. It's not worth keeping them down, suppressing their wealth,
Right.
or the raising their standard of living for such a.
Right. And so this is what I need. What I really want to impress upon people today, right? Is okay. So there's along this like spectrum of skepticism about climate change, right? Like there's a lot of different like this huge spectrum of people, like everyone from like people that are like really bought into climate change, that like think it's going to be very, very dangerous, and that we really need to pay attention to it all the time, every day. And it's really like we talked about the doomsday clock a couple of things ago. They're thinking, this is the number one issue, and that if
It's
we
their
don't
whole
pay
personality. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And we're all going to we're going to turn into Venus or something. And then there's people at the other end of the spectrum who basically like have never really looked into the science, kind of just ignore it, and don't really pay attention to it. I'm kind of in the middle. Like, I think that this is a thing, right? Like humans affect the environment, right? And
there's also the extreme of the people who are, the world is my dumpster, and actively want to pollute, don't care about any, right? So that is a small minority.
Yes.
But we do have to acknowledge that there are those who, even if this is bad, I still want to dump it in the ocean because it's cheaper for me or whatever.
Right. And that's obviously ridiculous, right? Like if you've got a corporation, who's like, well, I could do this responsibly, but I could just dump this in this lake and, save X whatever dollars. What?
Look, it's not corporations. Corporations can be sued. It's countries.
What? Anybody could do it.
You're like Russia, or especially countries like, hey, this might be really expensive for us to treat this sewage, to strip out this pollution or something, or we could just dump it in the ocean, and and so you'll have certain countries that are being responsible, and other countries very close that aren't. I think that's the bigger issue, and why people are sort of chafing and looking for international law.
The biggest problem is China, right? Because they're by far like, there's first of all, there's like 1.5 billion people there. Second of all, they're not nearly as climate conscious as America is, and it's so Tanya asked, did we look into our water source? What about our water source did you want to talk? I mean, I did. I spent a lot of time today looking at a lot of different water sources, but the biggest thing that I wanted to point out though is that there's this middle position, and this is where I feel like there's plenty of room for compromise in the conservative and liberal positions, in the Republican and Democrat positions, because this seems easy enough to me for everyone to be like on the same page as far as, yes, humans affect the environment. Yes, we should treat it well, but yes, we should do what's best for everyone anyway, even if it's at the expense of the environment, right? Like, because part of this game is people are like using this fear to put us in a situation where we're actually hurting ourselves. Like and I'm going to give you a couple of situations that happened not long ago. One of them is the Texas freeze of 2021, right? Most people don't know about this, but Texas recently became very, very reliable on a renewable energy source. That was wind and solar, right? And so since they were so reliable on it, their power, there was a winter storm that came through, right? And their power grid failed because part of it was winter storms involve lots of cloud cover, and they don't have, there's not much heat, right? So it's freezing, and you've got no solar, and basically the wind halts, right? And so you've got this situation where there's no wind, no solar, and now their windmills are starting to freeze, right? And everything shuts down, their whole system shut down, and they lost literally 250 people because they didn't have backups of gasoline, and just like natural gas stuff that they could have just dumped into the system to make sure that people were safe, to make sure that their energy didn't fall apart. And yet instead they're just like, all right, it happens in Germany. It happened in California. There was a huge heat wave where their system went down and they didn't have enough. There was all this, everybody's trying to, crank out the AC because they're dying. It's like 103 degrees. And like, meanwhile, everybody's going to the ER with heat stroke because that we didn't there. in the meanwhile, see, this is the thing. So, right, we've got on this one side, we've got this fear mongering, telling people that it's going to cost lives if we don't do anything, but it's going to cost lives if you do as well. So you need to put those both on the scale and weigh it and understand that, like, whatever comes out best for human beings, that should be what we go with, right? And if that means that we need to temporarily use fossil fuels until we can get more renewable systems in place, then that should be a reasonable compromise that everyone can come together on. I don't see why that would be hard for anybody. Charlie says, I'm from Texas. And yeah, he was there. Right. So yeah, and he was a junior in high school, and it was during COVID. Yeah, that's right. Same time period. Power was out for a long time. You see, he had a personal power generator. One of the problems in Texas, actually, one of the primary things that caused death were that people were using their generators incorrectly, and it was causing carbon monoxide poisoning. And so, like, you've got a situation where, like, you could have this done all regulated, all at like the local level or state level or something, where everybody's we're following the EPA guidelines and everything like that. Nobody's dying of carbon monoxide, and nobody's dying of hypothermia because they're not freezing to death. But instead, we're like, oh no, we need to use wind and solar all day long, and that's it. Like, it's fine to use those things, but it shouldn't be like, we shouldn't be reliant on something that can just fall apart when we need it most. We need to have systems that are in place. Yeah.
What the key word we're looking here is energy diversity.
Yes, diverse. Exactly. Right?
So diversity and energy, right? And right, not trying to trap us in, so that we have nuclear options, we have coal options, we have natural gas options, we have solar options, we have wind options, we have hydroelectric options,
and
so
nuclear.
All those things. Yeah. So obviously, having that type of diversity strengthens our energy grid. Now, really, we complain about these. These are big things because America has largely a very stable energy grid. We take it almost for granted. So when it creates problems, it creates big problems because our systems are just put in place and designed and engineered in our lives by having access to the energy we need, and that's great. That's what we should want for the third world, right? That they can not only have the means to implement that system, but administer it. Administering a power grid is also a big thing.
So Tanya says, do you think our fresh water is being polluted? I mean, the answer is obviously yes, right? Like, I mean, everywhere from like a company who tries to make shortcuts to a kid who goes into the river and pees in it because it's just not like, it's all over the place. But the question is,
contaminants are not pollution,
right?
I think
you want to talk about
so it is semantics. We can talk about it, right? Yeah, a moose piddling in the stream up above you, right? And people are talking about, you go to Alaska and there's the glaciers that are melting. People want to just drink this glacier water. Oh, it's so, they're like, the locals know, you drink that stuff straight without boiling it, you're going to have diarrhea. You're going to have the trout. There's still stuff, right? There's still contaminants, even in the clearest, like glacier water. So obviously, we need to, for our drinking water that we consume, not just water that we're farming out or what called non-potable water is what we call that. But water that we consume, right? We test it, we treat it, and then we find out, hey, whoa, if certain pollutants are coming up in that, we want to get to that. Here in North Carolina, in the triangle where we live, we get most of our water from Falls Lake, but also through a system of wells. Right, so coming through the rock, and we have one of the better systems as far as large city, large population, right? Several million people in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area have a really good system. But there are times, where it can be overwhelmed, or they can have something and stuff. But you have to monitor that. So contaminants, though, can come from any type of algae bloom or something. But pollution is we're directly either industrial runoff or things or something. Somebody is nefariously or purposefully putting something that would be poisonous or toxic or negative health effects into the water,
Right.
hoping that it gets through. Now, like some sort of cartoonish supervillain, we hope that doesn't happen. And usually the water sources are chosen because there's not industrial plants upstream. Like we chose Falls Lake because there's no big factories that would be tempted to dump waste upstream from it. Now, right,
Right.
other rivers, we just be like, obviously we're not touching that thing. Okay.
Reminds me of that show. You remember that show, Captain Planet? Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
classic, right? Like, go planet. Like that was half of the episodes were like dealing with pollution in water. That was it. Like, but I mean, right? Obviously, these things exist, and right, microplastics are an issue, right? Which is a tangential issue, right? It's not exactly what people are talking about when they talk about climate change, but it's definitely a situation that we need to be cognizant of, and human beings need to find a situation where, if we can, we'd love to get to a situation where we're essentially having like a net zero effect on the climate. That would be great. That's like the holy grail of the situation, right? But bear in mind, just because that's what we're shooting for doesn't mean that if we don't do it ourselves, that the globe won't do it for us, right? This is something that's been happening for eons and eons and eons, and not once, not twice, but like billions of times has there been like a new thing that's been introduced to the climate, whether that be a new species or a new, pollutant or a new like type of radiation or new on and on and on. And billions of times the earth has dealt with it, right? The earth either adjusts or animal life changes and adapts to feed on a new type of thing, or plant life starts, photosynthesizing, carbon 14 instead of carbon 13, and you're like on and on and on. It just the globe just changed. Tell the coyote and rabbits story again, because that's a
All right,
classic.
yeah. So in biology is like when there's a large population of rabbits. Well, one thing they'll notice is like there'll be a small population, dwindling population of coyotes. People will freak out. Hey, these predators are down. Coyote populations are down. And what happens is when the coyote populations are down, wild rabbit populations soar, right? And that can happen very quickly, right? Rabbits have a very short reproductive cycle. And so all of a sudden the rabbit populations soar. Well, then what happens? Right now, all of a sudden, the coyote populations soar. They have more pups in their litters, and more of those pups are well fed and live through it. And all of a sudden, you have a huge coyote population. And then, what does that lead to? Now, all of a sudden, the rabbit population starts crashing because there's so many things, and then it gets so low that now coyotes start starving, or they have smaller litters and things like that. And so it's boom, and it's boom and bust. It's always going to happen unless you're deliberately either trying to raise rabbits or shoot coyotes or something like that. But once they've seen it enough, the biologists, at least in areas that have studied it, now know to calm down. Okay, the coyote population's struggling, but they're not endangered because, right, the difference between something struggling right temporarily and being endangered are very different.
Right. And I think this is a situation with mankind. I think that yes, we're a new element, right? And we're fine. Like ever since the dawn of smelteries, right, where we're finally starting to be able to like crank out our own like metallic implements and like, make very, very rudimentary machinery. Yes. So we probably had an effect. But like one of the charts I stumbled
We
on.
always cook our food. We love to cook our food. Like nobody else wants to cook their food, just us and dragons. Right. So we've always been releasing carbon into the air.
Dragons, yeah. So one of the charts that I stumbled on was like basically it showed me like the amount of carbon that's released into the atmosphere, right? And the amount of carbon that the oceans basically absorb and eat up, right? And then next to it, it showed me like the amount of carbon that man puts into the atmosphere was like this much. And to be fair, next to it was like a smaller amount where the oceans just didn't absorb as much of the man-made carbon, right? And it's like, okay, but the amount of like effect that we're having on the total system is just like infinitesimally small compared to the amount that's just constantly cranked in. And again, I'm not saying that that's not a get out of jail free card for everyone to just start like burning everything they see, and for us to like, just start like, dumping waste and stuff into the environment. Obviously, we want to be good. But the biggest thing I want to impress on everybody is the absolute worst that can happen is the world gets a little bit warmer and probably humans thrive because of it. Right? And in the meanwhile, all the third world nations go from an average wage of $1 an hour to like $30 an hour. And all of a sudden they see, because here's the thing, we have to always balance all these dangers, right? On the one hand, we've got climate change, but on the other hand, we've got like poverty, malnutrition, famine, starving, like those are the big threats to humankind in third world countries, right? Those are the things that we really need to deal with. And I know it sounds like I'm in a way, it's funny. Tanya says I'm so optimistic. In a way, I'm optimistic about climate change, but I'm not optimistic about like the third world countries' conditions. So like, I'd actually really rather we address those by neglecting climate change temporarily, like not like just like turning a blind eye to it, but like worrying most about getting those countries like industrialization so that they can feed themselves, so they can work, so they have enough energy to feed their systems, and we're not like hogging it all in the West. That's what I'm worried about.
Well, I think there's enough to go around, right? One of the big things that was really told was that all the easy oil was going to be extracted by the early 1980s, and that what they found is just huge reserves. Right, we're better at identifying it off the coast of Brazil and Argentina and in the Gulf of America. The huge reserves. I don't know if you've seen the Deepwater Horizon, the movie.
Yeah.
But and this stuff, well, it takes engineering, but we have the engineering and the technology to exploit it. Once we do, right, there's still vast amounts and enough to power the third world and to do it reliably. So there should be lots of concerns, and it should be something that we consider. I'm not saying that nobody should consider climate impact, but right, when you want to do a development, even in California or anywhere, right, you have to do a study about what will be the environmental impact of this. But that doesn't mean they don't build the building or a theme park or university or road or whatever. You do need to consider it, but it shouldn't be a break or a stop ultimately. Especially if there's a reasonable accommodation, like, hey, when we're building these bridges over streams or roads, what are some things we can do to protect runoff and to keep pollution from going straight into these streams? Sometimes there's some very reasonable engineering that can just be taken into account with a little bit of planning.
Right. So Erwin says that carbon thread is every Karen that won't shut her. Yeah, I'm thinking of my ex-wife. No, I'm kidding.
I would like, you know what? All right, so this is my spicy take.
Yeah,
I would really like to see a constitutional amendment that identifies that carbon dioxide, oxygen, O2, and water, H2O, will never be considered pollutants, will never be, and are part of normal organic life molecules, and the government will never penalize, fine, regulate you for anything that produces at least those three things, right? Now, if you have a plant, that produces carbon dioxide, oxygen, or water as a byproduct, government should be like, hey, that's just normal organic compounds, right? It's when you start doing other weird molecules, all right, those might be pollutants.
What about so just as a little pushback, now keep in mind, I don't know the science, right? So I'm not skilled there. But like, do you know what the odds are of like carbon dioxide like losing an oxygen molecule or something like that? Like, because I know one of the things that happens in the ocean when it gets absorbed is that it gets like split up into ions and stuff like that. But I don't know enough about it to know like what the risk is of that happening.
Like carbon, because carbon monoxide is
It's dangerous, right?
dangerous toxic to humans, while carbon dioxide is inert and actually
Right.
beneficial to plants and other things. Normal organic material, like burning things, normally creates an aspiration. Normal
Right.
things create carbon dioxide. It's abnormal. It's if you're burning, depends on what
Like
type of carbon source you're burning, I guess.
Like I think plastic turns into carbon monoxide, right? If
Yeah.
you did, and styrofoam, maybe, I don't know.
Well, yeah, and even when you're burning wood or burning anything, there will be a small amount of carbon monoxide, mostly carbon dioxide. But the carbon monoxide, even in smaller forms, is dangerous enough that even if it's less of it,
Right.
because what happens, right? If you're burning or consuming oxygen in a closed space, you're right. What will the main problem is your body will try to aspirate carbon monoxide like O2, but it goes into your bloodstream, but we can't actually use it that way. So your body thinks it's oxygen, but it's not.
Raymond Parker says NASA 2 years ago said that the sun is getting hotter and the Saturn rings were melting. Yeah, one of the things to think about climate change is that the sun is getting hotter over time. Very, 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 very slowly, but it is like every year getting like very, very fractionally warmer, and we'll continue to do that like for the next billion years until we actually do reach a point where it's too like at some point the sun actually will expand and encompass almost the Earth's like orbit, right? The Earth's elliptic. But at that point,
93,000 miles? You think it will expand 93,000 miles?
Oh yeah, more than that. But it'll expand. In theory, the Earth, the sun could take up like all of the space from the Earth in. That's how big it could get at the like the maximum. But even if it doesn't, even if it only goes to like Venus, it'll be too warm for us. We'll have to.
It'll be like Krypton.
Like by that time, we're going to be at Mars in like 5 years, right? Like we're only years away. One of the things that I'm most optimistic about when it comes to this topic is our technology is just always improving, right? It's just always getting better. One of the things that I'm super excited about is fusion technology, fusion energy. We're at the point now where I would bet within 10 years we will have like we'll have fusion energy at least beginning to service communities. Like in 10 years it'll start to be like won't be everywhere, but it'll be like, in several key zones, and then other places will pick up on it. And even next gen like fission nuclear technology is fine. Like gives plenty of energy. We have so much technology that'll help, right? And I think there's one of the things they're working on is something called a synthetic engineered microorganism, where they basically got these like little they're like little baby bio engines, right? And they're programmable. You can basically like tell them like go eat microplastics or go eat CO2 molecules or go eat, and it'll basically just go out there and just self-replicate and eat until now of course obviously we have to control that too, because that's itself an ecosystem disruption, right? But it's always like that in cycles. We're going to be able to address this stuff because we just have so much technology coming out. Go ahead.
It reminds me of, do you remember biodiesel?
2008,
2009, 2010, biodiesel was a big deal. And it was going to be reusing, fuels. And one of the things, BYU, my university, I'm a alma mater, partnered with Oklahoma State and the University of Oklahoma and was developing microbes, essentially genetically modified yeast, kind of thing, that could take yard clippings, like the yard clippings you would collect in a city, could take and just put them in a vat, and they would essentially ferment into alcohol. This thing would be able to turn that into something that could then be turned into a usable fuel, and and it was just like yeast essentially. Once you created the cost was really all in the research, and then it's building the tanks and stuff to do that. And it's essentially like fermenting all of your wood scraps could turn that into a thing. But
That's
That
awesome.
didn't really become a thing. There was a big push on this. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
Back then, it was the first time gas prices really for a long time were really high, and so people were looking, especially diesel, which affects like the trains and trucking
Shipping.
industry really heavily.
Yep.
So there was a lot of things. Well, then prices have kind of come down. They found a lot more of these reserves, and essentially, the thing has been either go electric or go
Boogie woogie woogie.
petrol, fossil fuel or electric. This sort of middle way has
Right.
kind of people have dropped. Right.
Yeah.
There's talk about that hydrogen will be a fuel source that we'll be able to reliably do. I think when we talk about energy diversity.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Well, Tanya, tell me. Tanya says, even though she doesn't agree with all of it, tell me which part you would challenge and why.
You don't like energy diversity?
Yeah, energy
And
diversity.
inclusion?
We want
Diversity,
equity, and inclusion of energy. No, I mean, so yeah. One of the tricks here, right, is that we've been told these things for so long too that it's like kind of in our head. One of the tricks that I encourage everybody out there to try, like the next time you have like a real climate change conversation with somebody who's telling you that climate change is like it's going to kill everybody or something like that, ask them how, like exactly how. Tell me exactly what's going to happen, step by step. What are the odds of it happening? What's the margin of error? Like you ask those three questions, and like literally 99.9% of all the people that you're talking to are just going to fall off. They're just going to like all of a sudden that conversation is just going to end. Right?
You're like, hey, look, I decided not to fly my private jet today.
Yeah.
So you should be
Bernie
thanking me.
Sanders.
I was this close to taking my private jet somewhere, but I didn't. So I mean, I deserve a climate medal. Come on.
If you had flown your private jet, you would have been here on time today.
Yes, that's true. True. So the sacrifices I make for the environment.
Isn't it like it was like Taylor Swift or something was like whining about the climate, and she takes like 100, and she's on record for having taken like the shortest private flight ever. Okay, so Tanya says, but do you know the answers all? So which questions are we talking about? Like, of course, I don't know the answers to everything, but I am given some options, right? So one of the best options I think is to rotate to fusion energy. Right. The moment we rotate to fusion energy, nuclear is by far the safest and cleanest, by far, right? Even now, without fusion, even fission nuclear is by far the safest. And you're talking about the ones that I just asked. No, of course not. I don't know. Nobody does. That's the reason why I say to ask these questions, because nobody has the answers. Right. Like when I went online, I went all day online today just to research for this, to like freshen up everything I knew about climate science. And there is no answer as to when this disaster is going to happen, what the odds of it happening are, and what the margin of error is. The only thing, like if you go online and you look at AI or something, and AI like will tell you, it'll like compile all the data. It'll say, well, nobody really knows, and these are just educated hypotheses, and the margin of error is like often larger than the stat itself. It's like it'll be like 50 years plus or minus 50 years. It's like when you have a margin of error that large, you don't have that's not even an answer, right?
Yeah, it's not statistically significant. It's
Right.
statistically yeah.
And that isn't to say that we should ignore it, because I'm a firm believer in like empirical data. Like I'm a firm believer in like, as we notice things, the more we notice, the more we should pay attention to it. And we have noticed many correlations like the more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the warmer the climate seems to get, right? That's a safe correlation, and we've got a lot of data for that. But understand that just like a weird philosophical conversation, like a religious or philosophical argument, there's so many circles that this can go in. For example, I'll just give you one example. Like one thing is like, okay, let's say that the carbon dioxide, makes the temperature warmer, right? Which evaporates more water, which puts water vapor in the air, which turns into cloud cover. And then the cloud cover has enhanced reflectivity. So it might bounce the sun's rays off of it and kick the heat back into the atmosphere. Now, that isn't always going to happen. It depends on where the clouds are on. Like, this is the thing.
But
Like,
then
it just
water is the best molecule for absorbing heat in, basically that God ever created. So
that's another.
Right. So we now store more water in lakes and reservoirs. Right, we have more things to store that. So obviously that's capturing heat. Lots of stuff that's capturing heat. I think the question for me is where does the line? Where does policy? Right now we can. I think there's common sense here as a common man. We can live common sense. We shouldn't be, belligerent about the environment or willfully try to ruin that. And realize that's a public good and good citizens try to not litter, not pollute, obviously, or not be any deliberate malfeasance. But when it comes to like the government, like how much money should we spend on this? Is it just enough to study it and understand it, or like do we start taxing people, right, for carbon offsets or for things like that?
Right.
At those levels. And that's part of the thing is we don't know that any of these policies will actually affect environment because man-made, while it is a part of it, is such a small percentage of it. There's so many global things, ecosystems going on that are not controlled by us. I always like to think if in the opposite, if the world was cooling and we needed to heat it up right now, what would our government policies be doing?
It would be the same. It would be the same thing. It would be like, please send us money. That's it. Like, that's the game, right? And I mean, I don't get me wrong, because I want to make sure that everybody understands that I'm on board with the fact that we affect the environment, right? Like, that's a no-brainer. I'm on board with. I have no clue how much, right? Like, if you were to say, if someone were to ask me the question, like, what percentage of the climate changing up or down in temperature does a human input have, I would have no idea. It's probably relatively small, but I don't know. I mean, all I have is those charts. So Tanya says, so if Elon cleaned the planet, what does that mean to you? And have you looked into what he says about climate change and pollution? Yeah, Elon talks about climate change a lot, actually. He wants to make sure that we are definitely making sure that this planet is well taken care of, because obviously it doesn't make sense to go to a new planet just to mess it up the same way that we messed this one up. And so, of course, that's why he got involved in Tesla in the first place. Now, Elon is actually, he's actually a part owner in like a lot of different companies, right? It's not just Tesla, SpaceX, and the top 6 or whatever. He actually is involved in a lot of like clean energy companies and a lot of like a lot of cutting edge stuff, a lot of the AI programs that are dedicated to climate change. And there's already a bunch of AI models, which, by the way, the newest AI models basically predict what's called a negative feedback loop. They basically say that we're not going to get warmer and warmer and warmer. We're going to hit a spot and like 2 or 3 degrees higher and then stop. So who knows? Nobody knows what's going to happen.
Plateaus happen, right?
Right.
It's growth does not happen forever. You hit a mature cycle and it plateaus, and so yeah, like at certain point it'll be warm enough that it will supercharge plant or plankton or whatever will be able to deal with the CO2. I think that so common sense is trying to limit the other pollutants that are non-CO2 that are 10 times more heat retentive, shall we say, greenhouse gases, right? The fluorocarbons, they call them, right? The much more complex ones. And those are things that we can, the technology, we can find alternatives to them. I know they created this the things to put fires out on airplanes, engine fires.
Yeah, Halon.
Right, that halon, and they don't make it anymore because it's bad for the environment. But boy, it is good at putting it on an airplane. Well, they still have the stuff they made it years ago. They recycle it and try to use it because it's so good, but they are dedicated to not making it anymore.
They moved it to like the military uses it, but they won't put it out in the private market anymore because it's like But I mean, yeah, I mean, this is the game, right? So, and understand, like I said, we should always be good stewards of our environment. I always, like 100%. I would never recommend anybody go pollute anything. I would never recommend anybody try to hurt the environment. But understand that this is kind of an. I want you to ask yourself one more question, and that is, suppose everything on Earth were exactly the same, except for like, let's say we're already at our max. Let's say we were like 8 degrees warmer, right? And then you'd be sitting there thinking, like, all right, well, this is the environment we have to work with right now. Who's to say that that's like better than the one we've got at the moment, right? Like, there's no way to like say this is better, this is worse.
Yeah, qualitatively, yeah.
Right, qualitatively. Like, right, all we have is just we'd have two different systems. We'd have one
We
that's
just
slightly
know
warmer.
it's different. People
Right.
don't want change. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And if we were at that spot, we still wouldn't want to change. We just not want to change from a different place, right? It's like Christian says, if it was like if we needed to warm things up, we still wouldn't want to change. We just, we'd want everything to stay exactly the same or whatever. Yeah. I mean, that's the game we play. But anyway, guys, you were awesome. You were awesome. Thank you so much for coming. We do this every Wednesday and Saturday. Please like, share, and subscribe, and tell all your friends about us. We're trying to get this show to kick off, and if there's anything else, just let us know. Well, we'll take requests too. We'll like, if you guys have like a topic we want to do, just let us know, and we'll
yeah, feel free to comment on our long form videos. We do respond to those, and then we'll know what things you want us to talk about in our next live.
Yes. All right. Catch you guys next time on Common Mansplaining.